Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this. A Harrington & Richardson Pardner SB2 10-gauge shotgun. Now in order to talk about this shotgun, we are first going to talk about a very small amount of history because there's not that much to go over with this shotgun. Talking about Harrington & Richardson as a company. Now, the Harrington & Richardson company, as we know it today, more or less formed in the 1890s. It had previously been an association between Harrington and Daniel Wesson of Smith & Wesson fame. Now, the business had always been known for building fairly inexpensive shotguns. However, in the late 1890s, early 1900s, it would expand its business over to a cheap double-action revolver, which actually quite a few different companies were producing at the time. It was more or less like a double-action version of a Schofield Model 3. Or, excuse me, a Smith & Wesson Model 3, also known as a Schofield. And they were generally in very small calibers, like 32 short, something along those lines, and you used to be able to find those at gun shows for like right around $100, which a much younger version of myself was considering them for self-defense type application because it was super cheap. However, ammunition availability, the fact that they're not terribly good guns, not the worst in the world, but the triggers are terrible. There's this overwhelming sense that this is like a major safety risk every time you pick one up. So I just left those alone entirely. And we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole. So let's get back on subject. Now, the company existed in that form for many, many years. Nearly 100 years, actually. And actually produced M1 Garands during Korea, as well as M14 shortly thereafter, and was one of very few companies to even produce the M16. However, in 1986, it was bought out by the Remington Arms Company, and then in 2015, Harrington & Richardson, in its purest form, more or less slipped away as it got assimilated by everything else around it. Now, let's go ahead and start talking about this shotgun. This is a 9-pound, single-shot, hinge-action 10-gauge shotgun. It has a 24-inch barrel, which at the end of which we have a extra full turkey choke tube, which expressly states on the side of it, do not shoot steel in this. Now, this is a screw-in choke. You can remove this and put in a wide variety of other chokes that are available all over the internet for not bad prices. You can see here at the front, we have a brass bead sight, which is generally my preferred setup for a wing-type shooting shotgun. However, this being set up for turkey, I would prefer an additional reference point for aiming. However, Harrington & Richardson thought ahead on that and supplied some, not all, of the SB2s with these tapped holes to be able to mount optics onto. Now, myself looking at this, I do not think this would be a good setup for a magnified optic unless you were doing some sort of scout scope type setup with a long eye relief. However, I don't think that actually properly fits in this purpose, and I think it would be better off with a red dot sight. I think that would be perfect on this shotgun. Now, coming down to here, our wooden stock has been painted from the manufacturer with Realtree hardwood camo. It's also on our buttstock here. If we come back to our action, you can see we have a lever to open our hinged action where we have an ejector, which will really only work with expended cartridges. It's not heavy enough of a spring to be able to eject a live cartridge.
Well, that's awkward.
You'll see that we have a single action hammer located at the rear and no external safety, but we do have a transfer bar safety that keeps the firing pin and hammer separate. Now, coming back to our stock, supposedly there's some sort of like inertial doodad in here that's supposed to cut down on recoil, and then we have a standard rubber butt pad. This sling came with the shotgun when I got it. I did get this used, and we have our two sling points already drilled into the wood. All right, guys, how's this thing shoot? All right, so I don't know if you guys caught it in the video, but I do not enjoy shooting this shotgun. This thing recoils a lot. Now, Something to point out though is that all of my shooting impressions from this shotgun come from 3.5-inch turkey loads because that's all I have for it. I haven't gotten any other choke tubes for it because I really don't enjoy shooting it, so I haven't invested the money into it. If you were to yourself get perhaps a little bit lighter recoiling load and the choke tubes to match for it, you might get more use out of it. Now, what do I use this for? Well, I originally got it to be a turkey gun. However, I've not hunted turkey in years, and I have no intention of doing so anytime soon. Not because I don't like it, just because I honestly don't have the time, or maybe I don't give myself the time. It's one of the two, but it's an argument for me and myself at another time. I did have this in my home defense rotation. However, especially after I shot it more and more and realized that I really couldn't stand the recoil, I decided that though I could handle this in a pinch for home defense, I did not necessarily think other members of my family could, so I took it out of not just my home defense rotation, but also consideration for my home defense rotation in the future. Because I'm always weighing out the pros and cons of different firearms to be in my home defense setup. So, now, this more or less just fills the 10 gauge niche in my collection. Now, what do I recommend it for you? So, first things first, 10 gauge has more or less been soundly beaten out by the 12 gauge 3.5-inch. So if you're looking to decide whether or not 10 gauge is an applicable cartridge for you as opposed to a 12 gauge 3.5-inch, I would say go with the 12 gauge 3.5-inch. Now, if you're that guy who already owns all kinds of different shotguns and you just need to have a 10 gauge, I would say that we need to discuss a couple of things about that before you go picking this. So, first off, how much use are you actually going to get out of the 10 gauge? Do you want to hunt with the 10 gauge because you've never hunted with a 10 gauge before and you want to be able to say that you have? And do you intend to keep at it? That's the big question here. How much do you intend to hunt with it? If you intend to do a lot of hunting with it, I would recommend looking at some other products out on the market. The SP10 semi-automatic shotgun comes to mind. BPS, the Browning BPS, mind you, was made in a 10 gauge as well. There are a lot of options out there that would have a little bit more capacity, might be more applicable to, say, shooting geese or something like that. That's for if you actually plan on doing a lot of hunting with the system. I would recommend those. Now, if you're planning on just having 10 gauge for the giggle factor of having a 10 gauge, taking it out to the range, shooting it a couple of times, getting a feel for it, wowing your friends, amazing your coworkers types of things, if you just need a 10 gauge to fill that hole and you don't really have a need for it because you already have a 12 gauge that you use quite a bit, I would recommend that you go with this shotgun. This shotgun retails brand new for $253. So if you're just looking to have a 10 gauge for the sake of having a 10 gauge, this is perfect for that. Absolutely perfect. If you actually intend to use the 10 gauge, I would not recommend this. If you are somebody who was looking to have the cheap investment of a single shot shotgun as a kind of dual shotgun for yourself, I actually kind of talked about this concept in my If I Can Only Have One Gun video, which I'll throw the link into that if anyone has an interest because they're going through this thought process right now. And you think, oh man, I can pick that shotgun up really cheap and it happens to be a 10 gauge. I would not recommend this shotgun for that purpose for a couple of reasons. One, the ridiculous recoil. Even in 9 pounds, it's ridiculous recoil. And then 2, cost of the ammunition and availability. I can consistently find 3.5-inch turkey and then also some steel shot and blanks in stores around where I live now. And that's it. I don't necessarily see slugs or buckshot or any type of a lighter game load or anything like that. All I see are heavy loads for the 10 gauge. So if you're looking to use this as a general purpose shotgun and that type of effect, you may have some issue. You might wind up having to order more stuff in than you maybe initially thought you had to. Maybe that's not an issue to you. Maybe you live in an area where 10 gauge is more common. It may not be an issue to you. For me, it has effectively relegated this to kind of collector's status, honestly. Another talking point in my gun collection. Ultimately, if you're looking for just one single shot shotgun to kind of be your dual gun, I would recommend a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge. Emphasis on the 12 gauge. Definitely not a 10 gauge. Alright guys, this is probably the shortest video that I've put together yet. So, I hope you guys found this helpful, and have a good day.